then it was after the battle. They just had enough and they threatened me. And I thought at that moment that I was going to die. My name's Angie Collins, and I first encountered Sasquatch in 2017 when they kind of homesteaded on my property. And they were here until about, I think it was 2021, maybe early 22, when the bulldozers came and started, and bulldozed like over 300 acres all around me. So they left. But since that time, they sort of, I suppose this is an established route, maybe of theirs. And so they do still come through and sometimes give me little signs. But they can't reside here anymore. There's not enough space.
Well, I understand. So let's go back to first of all, how long have you been on that property?
Let's see. We moved here in 1999. My husband, this is his family's home. So it was built in the like somewhere in the 60s, 62, 63, something like that. So he actually lived here, growing up.
Did he know there were Sasquatch on the property when he was younger?
No, no, he said no. He said no. He said no, he had never had any encounter. And I didn't know about them until after his grandparents had already passed away, or I certainly would have asked them because they were farmers, and that's why they had, these plots of land throughout the county.
How did you discover that there were Sasquatch there?
Well, they kind of made me realize that they were there. I've always had dogs. Since we've lived here, I've been a stay-at-home mom. First, I had a child, and then as soon as we moved here, and then my mom ended up moving in and taking care of her. So I've been at home, and I've always had dogs. I walk my dogs on a certain path in the woods every day, and I started noticing things were changing, things that didn't have any explanation. When you walk in the same path every day and you notice the trees, and all of a sudden, big, huge trees would just be down. And no other trees down around it. I started noticing like a lot of hanging wise, like upside down wise, like a lot. I mean, things just started changing. I started noticing more and more things. And then I think the big kicker for me was the big X that I found. And then it was like a little tree teepee, sort of made out of saplings. And when I saw that on the same day that I saw the X. And I came back and I talked to this friend of mine, and I was telling her about these weird things. And I actually thought maybe it was old Indian spirits or, something like that. I mean, I couldn't explain it naturally to me. It seemed like there was something kind of otherworldly going on, some other explanation, but Sasquatch never came to mind. And when I said something about X's and that kind of thing, she was like, "Oh my gosh, you've got Bigfoot." And I was like, "Get out of here. There's no Bigfoot here. I mean, this is like central North Carolina. There is a lot of activity around here. I mean, where there were hundreds and hundreds of acres that they could roam and also that they could travel through. A lot of swamp area, very heavily overgrown, forested areas. And so they did have a lot of places where they could, set up camp for a little while. And they did because they had everything that they needed. But there were times that they were more active than other times. My experience with them was sort of like it's taken me a long time to process everything that occurred with me. I sort of have broken it down into like like pre-awareness, but things were happening, but it was pre-awareness, and then I was aware, And then there was the battle. And then it was after the battle. And that was the best time.
You say battle, I don't get an image of what you're talking about. So describe what you mean by that.
But when I became aware of them, and it seemed like they were trying to make me aware because they kept knocking, knocking, knocking. It was a lot of knocking going on in my woods. And at first, at that time, there wasn't any construction or farm, going where I was in the woods. But that was the only thing I could think of. It was an echo of somebody hammering. And I would kind of follow that. And then it would start coming from another direction. And I would turn around and follow that. I kept trying to find the actual source of these knocks, and I never could. Um, and now, when I look back on some of these things, I see that they were kind of toying with me a little bit. They knew about me before I knew about them. And then when I realized there were Sasquatch, I started taking pictures. I just every day I would spend hours while my child was in school, and after lunch I would spend hours in going through these paths, taking pictures, taking pictures. And I would go into areas and I would get a strong gut feeling, of foreboding, but I would continue to take pictures, take pictures. I just went everywhere. I was crazy taking pictures. And even though I didn't really know what I was taking pictures of, but I, it wasn't real. It didn't really, I knew something was happening and they were fitting the characteristics. But at that point, I hadn't actually seen a full bodied one. Um, and so it wasn't real to me. And then they tolerated me for a very long time. And then one afternoon, they just didn't tolerate me anymore. I went into this swampy area behind my house, and it was dusk. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was going to take, like, a scan picture, of the bushes, boom, 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 and then come back around, boom, 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 so that I could compare pictures because I knew they were very, very active in that area. Very active. I mean, I could hear them at night. I would actually sit out on my deck at night and I could hear them building and doing, then moving around. And they didn't seem to care that I was listening. But when I started taking pictures, I guess, they felt hunted. And I guess that's what I was doing that. I was hunting them with my camera. And that Sunday afternoon, they just had enough. And they threatened me, and it was. I mean, I thought at that moment that I was going to die. That was it. He was just on me. But
Describe that in detail. When you say he threatened you and you say he was on you, where were you? Where was he? What exactly took place that caused that? I can imagine that was very intimidating.
yeah, it was a Sunday afternoon. It's dusking, because this was in the early winter, and it's a swampy area behind my house. There's a pond and there's a swampy area. It's very thick brush, and I knew they were in there. So I went. There's an area when I walk around the bushes, the outer bushes, I can enter that swampy area from sort of the back coming towards my house. And so I had entered that area and was taking pictures of the surrounding bushes because that's where they could hide real easily in that thick brush. And you can't see them, you can't see them even though they're there. Um, and I was just snapping pictures like this and I had my arm extended and I heard a snort, a really loud snort, but deers snort. So I just thought, well, it's a deer. And I kept taking my pictures. And it never occurred to me that I didn't hear deer's footsteps. All I heard was one loud crunch. And I was turned to the right. He approached me from the left, and it was another crunch. And then this inhale that was like a locomotive. it went on for a long time. And then the exhale came, and it was angry. It was angry. And it just froze me. I mean, I was turned this way, and I just thought, this is it. And I just froze. And then it was like, I just got this notion, or something in my brain said, move, move. And so I just kept turning to the right with my phone was still extended, and I exited out, and I had to walk back around the bushes, come back around and come back into my house. And there was nobody home at that time. And I just crumpled to the floor. That was when they were real. That was that was when it was real. And it was so real. And I thought, what have I done? Because now they're mad at me, and they were mad at me. Like the next morning when I went out, I came out of my carport and went around my backyard. They started this knock that was just incredible. And you could tell it was a rock on a tree. And so I knew they were in the swamp, and it was like their battle cry. And I had to get my dogs out. I have a basement door. And I just took them out onto the field, which is surrounded on three sides by the woods. And when I got them up onto the field, then they started whistling. This just, it was a blood curdling kind of whistle. I mean, you could just imagine the strength again of their lung capacity. It's like and it made my blood run cold, and they were whistling. And so I knew I was surrounded. And so for a long time, it terrified me so. And I couldn't talk about it I was just in shock for a while, and I couldn't talk above a whisper. And I just did my routine, and at night I started staying up and listening to them, and they started messing with my house, jumping on my roof, pulling my wires. They tore up my dish. They did things. They just torch. I mean, they knew I was up and in the house. And so then I started putting spotlights out all around my house. And I started putting game cams, because I had gone on to Bigfoot groups and, asked a bunch of questions. What should I do? And these were the suggestions I got, that game cams, could be a good deterrent. So I did that. Light, I knew would make a difference. At the time, I didn't have any window dressing. So, because, I'm just facing the woods and everything. And so I put black plastic over all my windows. I told my family I was winterizing. I did try to tell my husband what was happening. And he said, his words to me were that he believed that I believed something was happening, but that, he just couldn't accept the Sasquatch thing. After all, he had been here most of his life. He had never encountered anything like that.
Was he
And
not,
so,
was he not hearing the knocks and the whistles
no,
and all of that?
no, not because he wasn't here during the daytime.
Mhm.
And at nighttime, he would go to bed, and no, and then that's when they would start. It was like they knew that I was the only one that knew, that I was the only one that was up. And so, no, they never, the only time anybody said anything was when it very first started. And our front windows are almost even with the front porch. My mom lives with us, and it has a bedroom there with one of those windows. And right before I started seeing all the structures and hearing all the knocks, my mom started complaining, like around, at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, that there were birds tapping on her window. They were just tapping on her window. And I would go out there, and of course, there were no birds. But I think that some of the juveniles probably were up on the porch, tap, tap, tapping, tap, tap, tapping. At that point, it was playful. But after I made them angry, and then, and started putting up barriers and resisting them, we being defensive, uh, scared, terrified. Um, I even, I haven't, I went to the police at one point because, when you see these things every day, you sort of become familiar with them. And so I started noticing all through town different things, different signs. But they were, they just really, you could go anywhere and find evidence or sign that they had traveled through there, made their mark, so to speak.
What type of signs were you seeing in the town?
Okay, like there's certain tree breaks, branch breaks that could be positioned in trees certain ways up on the top, and then the debarking of those. That's uh and nothing else is like that around it. It's like when you see these big debarked branches that are hanging in a particular angle, that is something that they leave behind, I guess, to say this is my sitting spot, or I'm not sure what it means. I do know that they do have certain watch spots, and they're they always have a like a sentinel, maybe probably more than one watching. They're always watching, so they're usually aware of what's happening before we're aware that they're even here or around us. And at that time, it was really terrifying to me. If I was really alone, I felt like I had to protect my family, and then started worrying about my community. People, I started hearing all these horror stories, and people. Oh, the one person told me that my dogs were going to get skinned alive and stuff like that. And
At what point did you actually see one?
oh, well, um, there was at one point I saw a juvenile running. I was sitting at my pond. I have a little concrete bench, and a juvenile ran like he was maybe 100 yards away from me. Just ran up the hill, just right in front of me. He was, and I think this is the one that caused a lot of mischief around my house after we resolved the battle. I think that was one I called him Pinecone, but he just walked right in front while he was running right in front of me. He just zoomed on by me. Um, Other time was when I had to bury my dog, and they came around because I buried my dog down by the pond, and so they sort of stayed with me then.
You could see them at that point
Yeah.
when you
Yes.
buried
I mean,
your dog.
they didn't
Yeah.
come right out and sit like in the open, but they
Hmm.
would come close enough to the wood line, to the bush line, that I could see them, see their outline, well, see their face, you
What
know.
did they look like? Describe to me what they look like.
Well, they were covered in solid black hair. The ones that I saw were covered. This juvenile was lanky, kind of, it looked like our juveniles would look when their body starts growing faster than their brain, kind of thing. But they're not uncoordinated at all. They're very swift, but their legs were very long and arms were very long. And like I said, he was kind of thin. So it's like they maybe don't build their bulk up until they get older. Older ones, were probably between like 7, 9 feet tall, the ones that I saw. Um, their hair was black, but maybe sometimes there would be a little bit of brown in it. Their faces were well, their faces to me were more human than ape. You hear a lot of people, they did have the sort of the a little bit of the sloped head. Their eyes were deep set, but they had big eyes. big eyes and very black during the daytime. Um, this part of their face was, was mostly you could see on the older ones was, not as hairy. There would be hair here, and then around, and of course around their head. But there was only one that had really long hair. I never noticed them. People talk about the odor, about odor. I never, when they were around me, I never noticed an odor. When they were, when I was pre-awareness and they were, just toying with me, I would follow, I'd get up on the field and I would smell like something like a skunky smell. It wasn't pure skunk though, because you don't really want to follow a real skunk smell. So it was just musky enough that it was bearable. And I would actually follow scent trails across the field. And of course, they would just end. But this is it's like a something scent that they have control of, that they can emit. And they have used that with me to sort of communicate to me, to let me know in some instances we're here, we're close by. Or sometimes when they didn't like something, like I had a female that liked to live in that liked to sit in my bushes. And when I would have to blow up the pine straw from the driveway, when I would get too close to where she was and she didn't like that, she would emit that odor. Sometimes she would whoop just to let me know, hey, don't blow, don't point that blower this way. And I just became accustomed to that, to them being in my yard. And really, to this day, I haven't really pruned my bushes. I just cut if I have to, because I feel like they still use that as maybe a stopover as they're traveling through, maybe at night. But they weren't worried at all about sleeping close up to the house. Um,
What year did they start that the clearing of the forest back there? And for what reason do you
uh,
think they did that?
I'm thinking it's about, well, the person who owned it sold it to developers. And our county right now is just being inundated with development. And so our farm is only like about 58 acres. And then there was like 350 acres all around us that someone else owned. And then beyond that, there was even more hundreds of acres that someone else owned. And as these big, huge areas started being sold off for development, the developers just came in and just, just clear cut the trees. I mean, I stood and watched them doing it. And, the big guy, the one I call big guy, he just knocked and knocked and, and it was kind of like you could hear, what he was saying, invasion, it's time to evacuation. Um, it was real. It was, it was sad.
About how many of them do you think occupied that area?
There was one large family group. And I think at times they may have had visitors that say came through and then left. There seemed to be a lot of young. It's like the swamp back there it was sort of like a daycare for a little while. They had a lot of young. So it was a lot of big family groups. I I can't estimate how many. I know that at one time, when excuse me, I had the flu. Am I rambling?
No,
Am I
you're
rambling?
doing fine. No, you're doing fine.
There's just
Absolutely
so
fine.
much.
I just
And
know my audience likes a lot of detail, and I think it's really good to know, what they look like, what their behavior was, how they interacted with you. All of that is just absolutely fascinating. So when were you first aware that they left?
oh, then that day they started bulldozing, because that's what I didn't hear the machinery. I heard them knocking, and it was such a booming knock. And I had already after the battle and after we we mended our relationship, um, then they would sometimes, if there was, they would knock and I would follow the knock. And sometimes they would lead me to to an arrowhead or something like that. Sometimes if there was a problem, like when my son defied me and went and set up a shooting target in an area that they were somewhat active in, and I didn't know it, but they let me know. They actually, when mornings just started knocking continuously. That's how I would know, okay, I need to find out what's going on. And when I followed the knocks, I came to a tree where my son had set up a shooting target, and that's what they wanted me to remove that. They wanted me to end that, and I did. That was just something that it was understood that even though my son was like 17 at the time, and he didn't really believe me either at that time. Um, but I said, well, whether you believe me or not, there's no shooting here, because there is other property that he can go to shoot. And we didn't really have a lot. Nobody had permission to hunt. So, it was a kind of a quiet area. So you can imagine why they felt comfortable there. One time I just wanted to follow the creek as long as I could follow it back as deep as I could go. And so I just followed the creek one day, and I came to this place where they had built a lodge. They had taken vines and small saplings and long grasses, and they had actually made like this tunnel house, and there were two entrances to it. I don't know how far it went back into the woods, but in front of it, you could tell all the grass was almost like it was carpeted, I guess, because there had been so much activity in front of it. It was just these little soft hills, and then these dark entrances to this like tunnel house. And at first I was amazed by it, and I started kind of to walk towards it. And then the entrances were so dark, and it just didn't feel comfortable to me. So I turned around and left, and I never went back to it. But I often wonder, what did those loggers think when they saw that? Who who did they imagine built that? I mean, they had to see it when they came in, because I mean they would have these big pincher machines that would just come and grab these trees at the bottom and just yank them down, and then would go through with their bulldozers and just bulldoze the shrubberies. They had to see that live. It's just, they mourned, so they really mourned, and I guess they dispersed all over. Um, there is a small group at the other property, but I don't bother them. I don't really know where everybody went. All I know is that there are times when those that are familiar with me and I'm familiar with will, give me a little sign that they've come through, that they passed through. Like Pinecone, he got to where he was an adolescent who just, pushed the boundaries, just like any teenager would. And I think that's where maybe we do get a lot of daytime activity, is from these young juveniles, because they're just full of themselves. And he would well, one thing that he would do, why I called him Pinecone, is that he would be up in a tree, and he would throw a pine cone so hard onto the driveway that it would explode. I mean, it wasn't like just, squirrels will knock the pine cones down and the clink, clink, clink. No, I mean, it would actually explode. And when he first did that, of course, he got a reaction like, "Ugh," it was that he liked to do things like that would shock me. And, um, it just kind of became a normal kind of thing to me. And sometimes I would reprimand him like I would a teenager. He was just full of mischief. And anyways, I know that he came through here because he slammed me a pine cone one evening. So I know that's who it was. But I do miss the time that we had. That was a good time. Like I say, they to me, they didn't come out right and open and stand face to face with me. But like we would do things like, okay, like I would walk in, my field is surrounded three sides with the thick woods. And they would be, all around and in the bushes and in the shadows of the trees and so on, like that. And some of them times they would follow me. I could hear them follow me as I walked down the field towards the woods. And one day I noticed this one, I think it was like, a long blackberry bush, how the branches will grow real long, thin, thick. And I noticed out of the whole wood line that there was just this one branch that was just, you know, bouncing up and down, bouncing up and down. So I stopped and I started looking at it. And so I started, kind of bouncing in the same direction as the branch and it stopped. And so I went over to the other side and started bouncing. And then the branch followed me over on that side and started branching, and started bouncing. And so that was kind of like a little game that we developed. Um, and I'm sure it was the youngins that were playing it. One time, I did try to approach, and I took like a little bit of peanut butter. People had talked about peanut butter. You know, um, I never got into that food gifting. They had plenty to eat. I would gift them other things, but they gifted me a lot. Anyway, I tried to approach the juvenile with a little bit of peanut butter. And when I got, probably within about 10 feet of that wood line of that heavy shrubbery, that juvenile sent out a whistle. I mean, I can't imitate it. I don't think a human being can imitate it because it's so loud and so shrill. And so I backed in. He didn't want me. The Jew, they didn't want me to have face to face out in the open contact. And I felt like that whistle, he was calling for the adults who aren't far behind, you know. So that's sort of like, that's a form of communication that I heard pretty regularly on that. I also, I heard them singing. Have you ever heard about them singing?
I haven't, no. Uh-uh. Not
Yeah,
singing,
they,
chatter, but not singing.
oh yeah, yes, yes. Yeah, the female that I told you about that didn't, that would sent me if I blew too close to her little sitting spot. She chittered at me one night, really just because sometimes I would just talk to her because I knew she was there, and she would kind of come out, and I could kind of, she would be sit in a sitting position, but I could see her silhouette and the shiny part of her face, and I would just talk to her. And one night I was just talking to her about the day and whatever. And she chittered back to me. I kind of felt like she was telling me, shut up already. But I don't know if her and I called her Ladybug. I don't know if her and Pinecone might have been brother and sister, maybe. I think they were about the same age. Um, it's sort of, I don't know, I sort of I got that impression. I got that impression. But that was way that we would communicate like that. But one morning, and I got in the habit of going out at all times, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And one morning, I woke up and I just went straight outside. I went through my carport, out the carport. And when I went out, they were singing. I sort of got this picture in my head of two females kind of just talking, but they were talking through song. It was harmonious, and uh, it was just really beautiful. And of course, when they heard me, when the door slammed, they stopped. Um, and that was one of the gifts that I would give them as music. I would take my phone or drive my car as close to the woods as I could and turn on my music, and I would play the music. They like music, not all music. And then the other time that I heard them sing was, again, it was like 4 or 5 in the morning, and I went out in my carport, and they were humming in unison. It was like I could hear it from there was many, and they were all humming, and it sounded mournful. They may have been, maybe one of them had passed away. That's how it made me feel, was that it was.
I've heard of a kind of sadness that sometimes people feel from them, from their presence at times. I'm going to go back to something you said earlier that, at one point when you stopped your son from shooting on the property, he didn't believe in them. And then I assumed then that later on he did. Now, what changed his mind?
actually that incident actually that incident, because that's pretty serious. And part of our when we recovered from our battle, so to speak, was that I kind of promised them certain things, and I felt uh obligated, very obligated, to keep those promises. And it wasn't that much, and to expect, I don't think. And one of them was guns. And so, I had told my son not to do that. And it's not like I was depriving him. There's an area property right down the road, again, where there's plenty of room for him to target shoot. But instead, he went over here to this area where I know they were very active, and, proceeded to shoot. And they told on him. I mean, they told on him. And so that day, when he came home from school, I confronted him about his target. And I asked him, I said, "How do you think I found out about that?" And I don't know. So I told him, some of what had occurred. And then I took him out to the woods. And there was a particular area where even, I guess some of the strongest skeptics would have to agree that these trees cannot be in this position naturally. It's just an area where they focus some of their, I don't know, I wouldn't call them structures. They're more like signs or markings, maybe. They may say something to each other. But anyway, I took my son, to this particular area. And I pointed out this one tree break, and then the arrangement, how the tree was arranged from that tree break. And then there was a big, huge tree arch, that was very close by. And then there's another like big, huge debarked tree that has been, angled. It's never just one thing, there's always combinations. And I just started asking him, tell me, how did this tree get in this position? And we don't have that many big storms. Our weather is pretty mild here, so we don't get snow. We don't get, every once in a while, yeah, we'll get a storm, heavy wind, but we're not big on tornadoes. We've had a couple of hurricanes, but other than that, our weather is mild. We don't have the strong storm events that would create some of these breaks, some of these arrangements. And my son couldn't come up with the answer, and he is very logical and very, scientific, and he said he didn't know. And then I took him to the tree arch, and how did this tree get like this? Even though there's a whole lot of other trees all around that aren't in that position and are still standing up straight. How did this one tree, get put into this position? And how is it staying like that? Why is the top of it at the ground, attached to the ground? And in some cases, they don't even have to attach it. I don't know how they do it. They arch those trees, and he couldn't explain that either. And then at that same time, there was a huge crash. I mean, a huge crash in the woods. I mean, a huge crash. And my son, he probably jumped 10 feet, eyes big as saucers, and I was kind of used to it. This is one of the things that they do, you know, they let you know big guy is here. And so I he wanted to leave. I said, "Are you ready to leave?" And we left. And on the way back up, I started re-asking him. I said, do you still think your mom is totally just off her bonkers? Can you, even, is there any possibility that you can reach the conclusion of Sasquatch with the different things that have happened? And he actually agreed with me at that point, that these things he couldn't even explain. And like I say, he's very logical, very scientific minded. So he's has sort of come along. Um, my husband, he just, even though, and I have some pretty good pictures, but he just doesn't see it. He doesn't see it. And I guess, some people just don't. In fact, none of my friends believe me. It kind of, but it was such a huge event in my life, such a changing event, such a awakening in my life that you want to share that with those that are closest to you. It's you know it's monumental when this happens in your life, and in no way prepared for it. Sasquatch, I had never discussed Sasquatch, and these people had known me 40 years, you know and now I'm telling you about this, and they just really, they can't believe me. And I've had that experience. I've written my story some on Facebook, and I have told it over the years orally. It's sort of it's to me, it's sometimes it's somewhat therapeutic, a little bit, to get it out. um Sometimes when I listen to it, I understand why people might think I'm nuts, because when I hear myself sometimes say some of these things that, I think, wow. And again, I have to ask myself, did this really happen to you? This was something that I had to come to terms with. This really happened to me. What does this mean? Why? Like I say, it was just something very monumental and life changing.
Well,
And
absolutely. I can totally understand that. I mean, that's a process and a lot of years that you went through gaining the knowledge that you have today of what your experience actually entailed. And then, of course, they left. And then you have also the aftermath of their leaving and the difference also in what you were seeing, what you were hearing, the playfulness of the juveniles. I mean, all of that was just as verifying as the evidence of them being there, it sounds like, the
yeah,
leaving. Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
My name is Greg Smith. I'm the host of the YouTube channel Backwoods Cryptids. And how I got interested in Bigfoot was the old Unsolved Mysteries, the old one, not the new one, when they originally showed the Patterson Gimlin footage. And then I thought that was kind of cool, but I didn't really get off my rear end and start doing this stuff until I watched this show called Mountain Monsters. Just about everyone can be familiar with that if they're into Bigfoot. And it's these bunch of old hillbillies, and I mean, older than me. Some of them Vietnam era, and they're out there hunting this thing. I realized the only reason I'm still stuck on my butt is because of me. So I got off my butt and started doing my own investigations around.
So, so you just got out and boots on the
Well,
ground, kind of started
no,
looking at
not right
what.
off the bat. I did research first. I one thing that always bugged me about shows like Mountain Monsters and these other shows about cryptids, they only do one episode for each creature they investigate. And in my head, I'm thinking you can't do an in-depth investigation and research in one episode. So instead of doing one episode per creature, I'm doing one season per creature.
Okay. So, but you did get out in the field and start researching?
Yes, ma'am. I first I looked up what should I start with? Go with my first season or my current season. Let's start my first season. We have a local cryptid in this area we've all heard about since we were kids called Old Green Eyes. So I started doing research on it. And I found something that most people think it's a creature that came around during the Civil War. But I found sightings that predate the Civil War and are during the Civil War. So that kind of acts that theory for me. So I did my first season on that. We actually got a festival, our first Earl Green Eyes Festival coming up here in October in Chickamauga. Then I got to look, well, that season was over. I started looking about other things, and I found these Bigfoot sightings out on Pigeon Mountain in Lafayette, Georgia, which is literally just like 15 to 20 minutes from me. They go all the way back to the 70s.
Well,
And I also
let's narrow down what we're talking about here. And first of all, you caught my attention with this Old Green Eyes. Now, this is a legendary cryptid in your area. Tell me what the legend was saying about Old Green Eyes.
well, there's several legends that say it could be a cryptid, or some legends say it could be a ghost of some type. I don't do ghosts because if they get aggressive, you can't fight back. But one of the stories is that the soldier got his head taken off by a cannonball, and what we're seeing is his head floating around looking for his body. There's one legend saying it's this statue of this cat come to life because they used this one woman's emerald earrings that her husband gave her. He died in the Civil War. But the sighting that caught my attention that came about during the Civil War was where two soldiers from the Confederate side were out scouting, and they came across this creature, large, hairy creature, bipedal, with these protruding fangs coming out of its mouth, and it had the smell of rotting meat on its breath. They said they reported that to their commander, and that's the one that caught my attention because that predates all the possibilities we have out there.
Did it
And
have
I
green
remember,
eyes? Was that
yes,
associated with the green eyes one?
yes, because at night people say they can see these eyes, kind of like most animals have an eye shine of some type. Where they're saying this creature puts out its own light from its eyes, kind of like luminescence.
There been any
And
recent sightings of this one?
yeah, they've even had an old park ranger back in the 1980s who saw it, and that's what got me going there. Now the problem is, I'm not really supposed to be in that park. Is usually closed. It's open from sun up to sundown, so we're not. I couldn't really do that much at night there. So all I could really do is talk to witness sightings. One guy who's actually his interview is on my YouTube channel, or he's seen it near Wilder Tower, which is one of the monuments out there. And most of the sightings take place up at Snodgrass Hill, just about a quarter of a mile from there.
But you haven't seen this one.
No, I have not.
Have you seen
And
any
again,
Bigfoot or cryptid?
yes, I have seen Bigfoot. I have seen definite signs of chupacabra even out here.
Well, tell me about your Bigfoot sighting.
Bigfoot sighting, that's when I first started doing this stuff. And a buddy of mine told me, if you want to see one, go camping down in Helen, Georgia. Okay. So I went camping in Helen, Georgia. Me and at the time she was just my girlfriend, but she went with me, bless her heart. And it's first of all, the weather was awful that when I chose to go, it was in February and it snowed probably 2 foot of snow on us. But I was up one morning cooking breakfast for us, and that son of a gun was up on the ridge watching me cook, watching my camp. my girlfriend, now my wife, stood up and said, "Is that what we're up here looking for?" I got to look when she was pointing. I'm like, "Oh crap, yeah, honey, that looks about like a Bigfoot." And it kind of put me in the mindset of, if you look at the new Avengers movie, picture the Hulk with Chewbacca's hair, and that's what I saw.
What color was the hair?
It was kind of a darkish brown, and black, kind of like in, almost black, but it was dark.
Were you only able to see like the outline of it, or were you able to get facial features?
I wasn't able to get close enough to it because the ridge was too steep, and I couldn't climb it, not without climbing gear.
And then what happened? Did it take off? Did it leave?
Well, I was in shock, and here's what the part that always gonna bumfundle me. I was in such shock of finally seeing one of these things in person. I just offered it a plate of, I had to fix it a plate. I literally looked up, told, "Hey, come on down, I'll fix you a plate of breakfast," and it shook its head no at me.
You could see the movement of the head, but you couldn't really get any facial features.
No, because I mean you don't have to be close up to see the people doing this right here, just shaking their head no. But I couldn't make out that I could see barely just where it. I watched the profile of its head. You know what I mean?
About how big do you think it was?
This thing had to be every bit of 9 feet, maybe a little more. 9 foot tall. Across the shoulders, I'd give it a good. See, I'm about right here to. I'd give it about maybe 2.5 foot across the shoulders. So that's a broad, big son of a gun.
Is that the only Bigfoot sighting you've had?
That's the only class A I've had. Yes.
Well, tell me about your others.
Well, one time again, me and my wife was camping out and with a group called Manimal Research, and she wakes up one night and she sees a silhouette behind our tent of something on two legs walking around. I'm groggy as crap. I ain't had no coffee yet, and I'm like, "Huh? What are you talking about?" By the time, and I guess it heard me because it took off. I get up, get out of the tent, and we can see behind my tent where there had been something walking around up there. I asked everybody else in the group that I was with, "Hey, was anyone messing around behind my tent early this morning?" Everyone said, "No, no, man, it was over on our side of the camping area here." I said, "Well, come have a look at this." They come have a look at it, and one of them, so they noticed the footprint, the leaves and stuff were kicked up, was too big for a person. Now, I don't know if that was just them messing with us or they really saw it, or if it really had that was real, but
So have
then
you heard any vocals?
I was about to get to that. Then up on Pigeon Mountain, when I started this investigation, we had a lot of vocalizations, different types though, like the traditional whoops, but we also had groans. And I had one roar at me. I did a tree knock, part way up this one trail. Just, wham, wham, wham. And this thing was roared at me to the point I drew a weapon. I was that worried. I drew a weapon. I don't do that lightly.
Did anyone else in the group hear anything that night at the
Oh,
campsite?
now at the campsite, one guy, he didn't bring a tent, so he just slept in his truck. He had one of those big trucks, a big back seat. So he just slept in the back of his truck. He said he woke up that morning, had to answer nature's call, and he noticed something very large moving at the top of the ridge across from us. And me and him went and checked that out, and we could see where something had really turned up the daggum under, where the brush and everything had fallen, the leaves and the pine needles off on it. We could tell where something tore it up.
What other types of cryptids have you devoted your research to?
Before I started doing my YouTube channel, I did a chupacabra investigation for a friend of mine while I was working at the time. His grandpa had a small chicken farm, and he'd been finding his chickens completely ensanguinated, which is drained of blood. And I went and checked out for him because, well, they ain't never seen nothing like that. They knew I was into this weird stuff, as he puts it. And I found these canine style prints, but they were only 3 toes on them. And I remember hearing stuff about chupacabra being like a canine type creature with only 3 toes. But that didn't really turn up none because I couldn't find that one little print. But that could also be a coyote that had gotten in a fight, in my opinion. I try to look for logical reasons why stuff's the way it is, why we're finding this stuff, before I jump straight to it being a cryptid. That way it's harder for people to dispute what is found. If that makes any sense.
Sure. So what all did you discover on that investigation?
Just the footprints, and that was all.
Was he was having chickens killed? That was his situation?
Yeah. Eventually I just told him best thing you could do is put like some cattle panel up on the top of the chicken coop. That way ain't nothing ain't getting in. Solve that problem real quick.
You never seen a chupacabra in that area before?
He's claiming he'd seen something look like that, but again, that's when I was first started out before he started doing it on YouTube, so I ain't got nothing to show for that one. So I don't bring it up much.
Well, what's the most interesting investigation you've done?
So far, Pigeon Mountain, because it's getting to the point where I'm hesitant to go up there without a rifle.
What all have you found?
I found tree structures. I've heard vocalizations. I have found footprints. And these things are getting aggressive more and more each time I'm up there.
In what way are they getting more aggressive? How are they demonstrating that aggression?
Well, one, roaring at me, that's a sign of aggression, like how apes do. 2, they have marked my truck, because one time I went up there and my truck was nice and clean. I go back to my truck from investigating, there's a big old mud smear forming almost a T-shaped curved T on the back of my truck. And I showed it to another person who I met with later on that same week. And they said, yeah, that's Bigfoot. Marked your truck. They know your truck now. This person had been doing Bigfoot such work out here decades before me, but they wish to not have their name mentioned yet. But they showed me all their stuff that they've had.
So what do you think Bigfoot is?
I honestly think it's a creature we have yet to have identified to put in the scientific category. In my opinion, because all these hokey stories about it being some kind of spiritual thing, no, there's so much physical evidence. There's so many, and plus, if you look at all the sightings all over the world, there's throughout the history up till now, mythologies, everything, they mention creatures like Bigfoot, and then these are years before we could even have intercontinental communication of any kind. But Australia, Asia, Europe, America, Native Americans. And then if you look at all the different tribes, even the ones that were enemies, they all had stories of Bigfoot type creatures. Like Cherokee folklore, which is what we're dominantly around here in this area. There's the Sukaloo, which is also known as the Cherokee Devil, or the slant-eyed giant. Then there's the Stone Man, who is said to carry a large stick, like a walking stick, which is basically like carrying a log, and it's supposed to have skin hard as stone.
You ever seen any orbs out there in the woods while you're investigating all that?
No, ma'am.
And nothing unusual happening. It's just hearing these.
Last time my wife went with me, she wasn't feeling good, so she decided to go back to the truck and stay in the truck. And I had the camera with me, so she couldn't record, but she had one Bigfoot walk up past between her and the watering hole there, which is called Blue Hole. It's also where some of the local kids, little kids can go wade in the water safely, not risk drowning. and another one over to the right of the truck, like trying to stalk her. And I got that message.
She sees quite a bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am. And it's honestly got her so creeped out she don't like going in the woods hardly at all anymore.
I can understand why. There's sounds like a lot of activity out where you're going.
Yeah, and one time up there with a buddy of mine, he brought one of them parabolic dish, like the private investigators use and so forth. And we tried to track the sound to its source, but then he started getting freaked out. And this is a hardcore woodsman. He had brought his daughter, who I've known them for a good while now. He said, "Dude, we got to back out of here because we got your wife and my daughter with us. This is getting too heavy. We got to go." Because we was hearing it from the front of us, from either side of us, and even behind us. We got back to the trucks that night, and there was a footprint right there by the trucks. But I didn't have no casting materials with me, so I couldn't get a casting.
Research Dogman, or have you had any encounters with that?
Not yet. I have done some research into Dogman to see if there's been any sightings around here, but I have not yet found any. And then my friend Bobby, the one who had the parabolic dish, asked me flat out, "Hey, is there been any Dogman sightings up here?" I said, "I don't know, Bobby. I hadn't found none."
Yeah. Well, what else can you tell me about your podcast, or about, any interesting research you're doing, or thoughts and ideas about cryptids?
Okay. Well, I'm still digging into the possibility of Bigfoot being in this area because what's going on in Pigeon Mountain, and I found an old report from the 1800s up on Lookout Mountain, which connects to Pigeon Mountain. It forms kind of a V shape where they connect at. And this is from a geologist who's gathering up samples, and he saw this large bipedal hairy creature carrying a log as if it was a walking stick. It pointed the stick at him, and he says it growled and roared at him. And then that's when I went into my book about Cherokee mythology, and it sounded like he met the Stone Man. Because that's how Stone Man did. He'd point his walking stick at you, sniff it, and then follow wherever he had to go.
Anything else?
Not yet, because again, I've only been doing the YouTube channel not that long. This is my second year. So, but I've been into this stuff most of my life. But I always tell people you can't just go wandering into the woods willy-nilly looking for this stuff. You got to do your research. You got to study the history, the mythology from locals around the area. And if you don't know you're heading in the woods pretty good, take equipment to help you. Get a compass. Don't go on those like a good knife. That's just rule one around here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Greg, I appreciate you telling your stories to me. I think they're very interesting, and I'll let you know when this comes out.
I appreciate it.